going to have a look in this lesson at the AQA GCSE English Language, Paper 1, Section A. So I've written that out at the top here. It's a little bit of a mouthful, as you probably imagined while I was trying to pronounce it all. So what that means, if I break it down into plain English, is we're doing the AQA exam board. So when you take your GCSEs, your school or your home school or your tutor or your parents, if you're working independently, will assign you an exam board. There's lots of different boards that create exams and they all give you GCSEs. So AQA is the name of the exam board that we're looking at. Make sure before you start this set of lessons that you are definitely doing AQA, because otherwise it'll be a pain, because you'll kind of work through them and then realise that your exam is structured in a different way. I'm making courses that cover all of these exam boards, so there will be a course for you no matter what board you're doing. They all give you a GCSE qualification in English language. This is different from English literature. So some of you will be taking 2 English GCSEs, language and literature. Most people, I think, take both. If you're only taking 1 English, it's very likely going to be English language, because literature is a bit more specialist. Language kind of covers a broader range of English. So if you're only doing 1 English GCSE, this is probably the one. Again, double check with your teachers or with whoever sets your exams before you start taking these courses. So we're going to look today at Paper 1, Section A. There's 2 papers and each paper has 2 sections, so both of them have an A and B section. Section A is the first section on Paper 1 and it's to do with creative reading. So the name of the paper is Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. We're just looking at the reading part today. So what that means, creative reading, means fiction writing. So story writing, narrative writing, creating imaginative worlds. So not writing that's based on real life, writing that's based on creating kind of fictional ideas, like an imaginative setting, characters that are made up in some way, that kind of thing. So one of the best things you can possibly do for this paper is start reading books and reading stories. And if you're not a big reader and you hate reading long books, read shorter books. Or if your language level is currently quite low, or you struggle with reading longer words and longer phrases, try and read at a level that suits you rather than a level that is too hard, because you can always improve your language level, but you can never improve if you read way too above your level, if that makes sense. So I'm dyslexic personally, and I used to find it really hard to focus on reading, especially long or difficult kind of texts. And I had to just slowly build up to reading more and more complicated things. And now I can just read Shakespeare, and I love Shakespeare, and things that people generally consider quite tough. They're pretty manageable for me. I'm still quite slow at them, but I do understand them really well. So you want to do the same thing. It doesn't matter what point you're starting at. Just be aware of what level you're at and slowly improve, rather than trying to read something that is way too hard for you, because that'll just put you off reading probably for life and you won't enjoy it. And personally, I think reading is something that pretty much everyone can manage to enjoy if you go about it in the right way. So read stories and read fiction. One way to do it, if you're kind of a bit daunted or a bit scared of the idea of reading a full 300-page book, because the average book is about 200-300 pages, is you can start reading short stories. There's loads of short story writers around. You can just Google short stories online. I'll probably give a link at some point to my favourite short story writers, so you can have a go at reading those as well. And read stuff that was written maybe in the last 30 to 40 years as well, because the language of those types of stories will be a lot closer to what we speak nowadays. If you get into early 20th century writing or Victorian writing or something before that, the language is much harder, so you need to know a different kind of vocabulary, and it can put you off. So start slowly, but definitely start making a conscious decision from this point until your exam, hopefully far off into the future, to read stories and to be aware of the techniques that story writing uses. As well as helping you with Paper 1, Section A, this is going to help you with Paper 1, Section B, because Section B is all about writing your own story. So the more stories you soak up and the more stories you're used to in terms of style and content, the easier it will be to come up with your own versions of stories. So now I've got the definitely read creative writing out of the way, I'm going to go into the more specific skills that we need just for this Paper 1 Section A, so just for the reading section. So the first one we need is reading comprehension. Comprehension means you understand what you're reading. This sounds sort of basic, and it is a reasonably basic skill, but if you're reading something that's difficult, then your comprehension can actually be a difficult skill as well. So the language that they'll give you, the kind of level of language in this paper, is going to be a little bit challenging. It's not going to be super, super easy or really basic. So you do want to be pushing yourself while you're reading your stories to kind of get to a level that is slightly above your current comfort zone. It's a bit like training for a marathon or something like that. You'd start off learning to jog quite slowly, but you'd keep trying to improve every time you run, and eventually you can do something quite complex or quite difficult. So reading's essentially the same thing. It's a skill you have to develop. Comprehension is a skill you have to develop as well. In order to develop the skill of comprehension, you have to be able to kind of read accurately. I'm going to just put this in bullet points underneath because it's not a new skill exactly. It's just sort of what you have to do to be able to read, to comprehend things. So read accurately means you don't pronounce things wrong in your head. You don't kind of guess words, you know what they mean. So you kind of, when you're skim reading as well, you don't sort of just bumble along without knowing too many words so that the meaning is lost. So practice reading longer words in your head or aloud, and keep a vocab list so that you're always improving your vocabulary. Vocab list is really important. I kept one from probably age 12 onwards because I was really scared of being bad at English, and I knew that I was dyslexic and I knew that it would be a problem for me. So I really tried hard to kind of counteract that problem, and one of the ways I did it, one of the most effective ways, was to keep a vocab list. So that's just a list of words that you come across in any situation, whether you're reading or you're at school or someone says a word to you. Always be asking what those words mean and jot them down. Use your phone, keep notes on your phone. That's what I do now for my vocab list. Something that's easily recordable. And yeah, it just improves over time your ability to understand more complex, more unusual reading passages. So the first one is read longer words. Make sure you can read them. Make sure you can break them down into syllables. So even if a word is really long, like half a line long, that will be broken down into small chunks of sound, which we call syllables. So make sure you understand how to read. Don't be embarrassed if you're, at your upper school and you still don't feel like you can read accurately. It doesn't matter. It's probably because you weren't taught properly, or maybe you're like me and you're dyslexic and you struggle. It doesn't matter what level you're at now with your reading. Just always focus on improving, and one way to do that is to be aware of where you're at now and how to get better. And one way to get better is to read these longer words, and another way is to keep a vocab list so that you're keeping track of new words that you come across. So that's one thing we need to do to boost our reading comprehension. Another thing we need to do is understand part to whole. This is generally a good skill for life. So what that means is understand the little details that you're reading, like the individual words, then understand how those fit into full sentences and what's going on in the sentence. and then understand what's going on in the whole paragraph and then the whole chapter. So this part to whole thing is again a skill that people can develop. Sometimes people think, well, you're good at reading or you're not, or you like language or you don't, but it's not true. It's like anything else, you can build on your current level. If you focus on it, you will definitely get better. And if you're aware of all of the skills and the way to improve, you'll get better a lot quicker. So make sure that you can pronounce each individual word in your head, even the longer words. And when you can do that, start being able to piece it together so that you understand bigger chunks of language, you understand full sentences or full paragraphs. So that's a kind of little breakdown of how to do the reading comprehension skill. And again, comprehension just means you understand what you're reading. So this is how to understand it, or how to focus on things that will help you understand it better. So the next skill we need is information selection. This is a kind of more straightforward skill. It just means pick out the right parts that relate to your question. Like any skill, it needs refinement and development. That seems sort of straightforward probably to most of you. And it's not too hard, but it's still, you can go wrong if you're not aware of the skill or what you're supposed to do. So information selection means you've got a question. That question asks you to focus on something in particular, and then you can actually go to your reading extract and find the exact pieces that relate to that question. So it's like you're not just sort of guessing or picking out the first thing that you come across. You're actually scanning through the whole piece of writing to find the best possible pieces of information that are the most related to your question. So refining your information selection skill will massively help you in this paper 1 section A. It's really, really important. Final skill I'm going to just talk about now. There are more, but these are the 3 really key ones that I have sort of in my head when I teach this paper. Understanding the effects of language features. So a language feature is a technique that a writer uses to enhance the meaning of whatever they're writing. You will learn about them as you go through your English courses, so things like metaphor, simile, alliteration. There are hundreds of language features, and the more you know and the more complex ones you know, the better. But when you're learning them, don't just learn what they are, learn what they do. So that's really important. So understand a wide range of features. As many as you possibly can. I would say minimum 10, but ideally probably 20, maybe more if you can manage it. There are an enormous amount of language features when you get into them. The more standard ones are fine to use, but if you know kind of more complex ones or slightly weirder ones that students don't tend to talk about as much, that's sort of more engaging to an examiner. So when someone's actually marking your work, they might give you a bit of an extra boost just because you're using features that are not well known or not well discussed. So it's a bit refreshing to them. And also some of those are a bit harder to understand and talk about. So in that case, it will kind of, just be a little bit more impressive to the examiner if you do use those weirder features or more unusual features. So understand a wide range of features. Be able to pick out these features from a text. So say I gave you a whole page of a story, and I said, what features are here? You should be able to pick them out. You should be able to pick out as many as you possibly can. And when you pick them out, you should be able to find the exact words that show that feature. So if you're talking about alliteration, for example, which is where the same letter is repeated at the beginning of a word, you would only pick out the words where that letter is repeated. You wouldn't pick out the whole sentence, for example. So you just be really specific to the part of the text that shows those features. And the final one that's really, really important is talk in as much detail as you can about the specific, I'm going to highlight, well, I'm going to make that word capitals. Specific effects of the feature. So don't just say repetition repeats a phrase or repetition makes it stand out. That is an effect. That's the beginning of talking about the effects of features, but it's not enough to get a really high grade on your GCSE. You need to say why those particular words in this particular extract are being repeated and how do they contribute to the story? How do they contribute to what the writer is trying to achieve in the story? So what is the detailed and specific reason or multiple reasons for using that feature? This is definitely not something that people just click with. No one has like a magical skill of understanding language features without practice. So if you struggle with this, focus on it loads, practice it loads, and it's totally normal that you struggle. Everyone that I teach pretty much struggles with this, the effects of features. You can Google them. So you could Google something like effects of repetition, effects of alliteration, and start building a list in your head of what possible effects something could have, and then apply that to a text in front of you and think what specific effects are happening here. So I have other lessons in other parts of the Scribbly English platform that deal in detail with language features, so have a look at those as well if this is something you struggle with. It's really crucial to paper 1, section A. It's also really crucial to section B, and it's really important in paper 2 as well. So the language features is something that will make such a massive difference to your grade. It's worth kind of spending loads of time on that out of your revision time or independent study time. So now I've got the skills needed written out. Jot down anything that you think is really useful, so anything that you didn't know before or anything that you need to focus on in particular. Jot down any new words that you didn't know, like maybe you didn't know what fiction meant, for example. You can add that to your vocab list that you just started creating. And then we'll move on to the second section. What do I have to do? You can pause now if you need to jot anything down. I'm going to just carry on. So what do I have to do is going to just be a breakdown of the questions in section A of this paper. So the first one that we have is a 4-mark question. So question 1, I'm going to just sort of do it like this. Again, I recommend writing this out because you want to sort of drill this into your head before you go into the exam. So it's a 4-mark question. You need to pick out 4 things, basically. So it will tell you to list 4 features, 4 things. The actual thing that it will ask will be related to the extract they give you on the day, and it will be particular to that question on the day. So you don't know what the question will be, but you know that you have to pick out 4 things. Because it's 4 marks, that means you get a mark per thing that you found. Sounds quite straightforward. It is mostly straightforward. I'll give you a couple of tips here. So you want to double check your answers. So don't just pick out 4 things and move on. Double check that they're right. So once you've written out your 4 things, go back to the extract, underline or just find those bits again to make sure that they match up. And then the other thing is underline the focus of the question to make sure you have actually focused on the right part of that question. So I'm going to just look at an example. See if I can copy this across. This is an example real question from an AQA paper. 4 things about Rosabelle from this part of the source. So before I highlight it, what do you think is the focus of that question? What is the main thing that you have to find given that question? So hopefully you picked out that the focus of the question was Rosabelle. If you didn't get that, you just want to practice finding the focus of the question. It's another skill you need to develop. It's not something that people can do instantly without any training. So yeah, don't worry. So it says list 4 things, but we know that already because that's what we have to do for this question. About is just telling us what it's going to be about, so it's not really a focus. And then from this part of the source just tells us we need to look at the language, the insert in front of us. So we know that already as well. So the only thing that's really important that we really don't want to miss is this word Rosabelle, the character Rosabelle. So if you found 4 things from the extract, but maybe 3 of those things were about a different character, or only 2 of those things were about Rosabelle and 2 of them were about setting, then we couldn't get 4 marks on this question. So the focus is absolutely crucial to getting as many marks as you possibly can on every single question that you do. So otherwise, that's a reasonably straightforward question. Question 2 then, a little bit harder. We've got to look a little bit in a bit more detail now. So it gives you a chunk of the extract to focus on. It might give you like a paragraph or like maybe 10 lines from it. So it wants you to just zoom in on that particular bit that it's given you. Don't look at the whole thing because you'll just automatically drop marks. And it's an 8-mark question. Sorry, there we go, 8 marks. And it's a language question. So the focus is on how the writer uses language. Yeah, so the focus is on how the writer uses language. This means that we need to use the language features skills. So we need to be able to pick out language features, we need to be able to quote them, we need to be able to talk about the effects. So you need to be able to talk about language features, you need to be able to pick out the effects of the features, you need to go into as much detail as possible about each feature and what it's doing. Ideally, you want to find multiple pieces of evidence. By piece of evidence, what I mean is a quote or reference for each feature. If you're aiming for an A or A star, they tend to pick out multiple examples that prove the same feature, those types of answers. So if you're aiming sort of for a C/B grade, don't worry too much about that until you've got the basic point evidence explanation paragraph sorted. And then when you're feeling quite confident with that, you can try and boost your grade a bit by using multiple pieces of evidence. So say there was 2 examples of alliteration and you were talking about the feature of alliteration, you'd actually quote both and then talk about what the effect is of both and whether they have the same effect or different effects and why. So it just makes it a bit more complicated and varied, your answer. It's only 8 marks, so you don't want to spend too long on this question. The main problem I have with most of my students in this question is they want to write forever. And actually 8 marks is not that much. The whole paper is, I think, 80 in total. So don't spend too long on this question. Maybe something like 12 minutes roughly. So probably aim for 2 to 3 paragraphs. And you want to be writing PEE paragraphs. So 2 to 3 main features that are really important, that are quite complex, that you can talk about in detail. In the extract they give you, there will be way more features than that, but they don't mark you on the number of features you can find. They mark you on the level of detail, the thing about the effects, the explanation of effects. That's the thing that is really important and boosts your grade. So you want to talk about not so many features in lots of detail rather than lots of features quickly, if that makes sense. Question 3 then. I'll have a look at that one now. This is quite a bit bigger, this question. What I mean is it's bigger in terms of you look at your entire extract. So read the whole extract. So it's not like focusing on a single piece. It's still 8 marks. So you write about the same amount, so 2 to 3 paragraphs. This one focuses on a different kind of writing skill. So it asks you to focus on structural features. This is kind of part of understanding language features, but it is a different area in itself as well. So another word for this is narrative features or narrative techniques. This might include a change of focus or punctuation, or the way that something is revealed or hidden, or maybe when we realize something about a character. It might be a moment of really dramatic action. There's loads of different ways that writers choose to sort of reveal structures or kind of use structures to reveal their ideas. So as well as understanding all of this basic language features, you need to understand the structural features as well. It's the same process, so 2 to 3 paragraphs, PEE paragraphs, and you get marked most highly for talking about the effects of the features. The specific and detailed effects of how those features are working in that moment, in that particular story in front of you. So when you do a point evidence explanation paragraph as well, your point should be quite short. For example, the writer uses tension to create a really dramatic moment. 1 sentence for my point. Evidence is also quite short usually. So you'd maybe reference a point which is tense, or reference like a quote from it which is to do with tension. And then your explanation would be about 3 or 4 times as long as your point and your evidence. So even though it's point, evidence, explanation, they're not equal lengths. The explanation is always really long, and the explanation is the bit where you talk about the effects of your evidence. So how does your evidence prove your point? So the same sort of process for this question, same number of marks, you should spend the same amount of time on it, but it asks you to look at structure rather than language, and asks you to look at specifically storytelling features, narrative features. The very last question of this section, question 4, is the longest question by far. You have to give yourself a long amount of time to plan and answer this question. For planning and writing, I think, let me just double check how long I would spend on this question. So the whole paper is 1 hour and 45. So you've got maybe be bad with maths, give me 1 second. 105 divided by 2. You can tell I'm not a maths teacher. Like 50 minutes roughly per per section of the paper. So that's just for the whole of section A. And we've got 8, 16, 20. So as much time as you spend on those first 3 questions is the same as what you spend for question 4. So what that means is you spend about 25 minutes on questions 1 to 3 and 25 minutes just for question 4 alone. It takes, it's a 20-mark question. So it accounts for half of your section A and a quarter of this whole paper. So sometimes people are really good at those smaller questions and they struggle with the big ones, so they don't really practice them as much. But in reality, anything that you struggle with, you should practice a lot more than things that you find easy, because they're going to make the biggest difference when you actually take the exam. And also don't worry, because most people do struggle with the harder questions, which is also why they happen to be worth more marks. So it's completely normal to find this type of question hard. So I'm going to just copy an example question here for you so we can look at what it looks like and then kind of break it down. Just because the actual way they're structured is pretty complex in itself. Layout's a little bit better in the exam paper. I've just copied this, so it looks a bit funny. Bear with me. So I'm going to just highlight really important bits of this question, keywords. The first bit is, where are we answering from, or what are we answering about? In this case, from line 19 to the end. You want to almost just draw a line or a box around a section that relates to this question 4. That's what I do when I teach students to do it, because it just stops you from accidentally quoting from the wrong bit or thinking about the wrong section. Then we have an opinion. So the student says, this part of the story shows that the red-haired girl has many advantages in life, and I think that Rosabelle is right to be angry. So that basically is an opinion. It's somebody's interpretation of this part of the story and their personal kind of feelings about that story. So that's an opinion. When you get this type of question, to what extent do you agree? What that means is you need to write an argumentative essay. So make sure you understand what argumentative essays are, how to present your argument, and also how to kind of construct and plan an argument. So the question, to what extent do you agree, basically there's different ways you can take that. So you can say, I totally agree with this student, I totally disagree, or I partly agree, partly disagree, because. It also has these 3 bullet points. Whenever they have bullet points, you want to make sure that you cover those in your answer. Even though it says you could use these, it means that you really should use them. So we've got an argumentative question. These types of things, because it's a full essay, it needs an intro and conclusion. It needs proofreading, so that means read back over it after you've written it. It needs PE paragraphs. Reading's one word, actually. I know, I just put an extra space there. Nope, it is one word. It needs PE paragraphs. So you need to be using quotes, you need to be developing points. Every point has to prove your argument, so it has to prove your side of the argument. It needs kind of essay style writing, essay style language. Make sure that you're comfortable with that as well. So this is the type of question that you want to be getting really good at, and the main way to get good at it is to write loads of these answers, get someone to check through, and keep trying to improve every time you write them. So try and do as many of these question 4 practices as you can, because they make a huge difference. to your grade. So that's all the questions. I'm going to just go through how do I answer the questions. So this is just a little summary of what I've gone through when I did a breakdown of each question. So the first thing is find the focus of the question. Understand the skills needed for that particular question. Make sure you're very comfortable with language features, structural features, and PEE paragraphs. And then for that question 4, you need to understand how to make an argumentative essay, or how to write an argumentative essay. So that's just a little kind of summary of everything that I covered in miniature, and that should make a lot of sense to you after going through the lesson. So basically this is what you need to do for your section A in detail. Hopefully you're feeling a bit more confident with that, and you know how to revise and which bits you personally need to practice and brush up on. Thanks for listening.